longer serve is because it uses pads of paper.
That's one of their methodologies, that's correct.
And that's one of the reasons they should not continue to serve.
That's correct.
And do you know how many ambulance services or first responders, well, let's do it this way. Do you know how many paramedic rescues or paramedic transports in the state of Utah use pads of paper in this fashion?
I wasn't asked to look at the other systems, only I was asked to look at this one.
What evaluation have you made of other systems in the state of Utah?
None. With the exception, I mean, I'm familiar with Salt Lake City. They don't use pads of paper.
And when you say Salt Lake City, you're talking Gold Cross?
I'm talking Salt Lake City Fire.
Salt Lake City Fire?
It's a system.
So in Salt Lake County, or is it just Salt Lake City?
Salt Lake City is what I looked at.
So Salt Lake City is what you looked at, not Salt Lake County?
That's correct.
And so within Salt Lake City, you have, they don't have pads of paper?
That's correct.
Do you know if others use pads of paper?
As I just mentioned, I wasn't asked to look at any other system in Utah.
But based upon your belief and opinion, if a 911 paramedic transport or rescue uses pads of paper in the same way Dixie Ambulance does, that would be a reason to not renew their license.
The fact of the matter is that when a paramedic is approaching a scene, and is actually saying the Dixie Ambulance protocol, scene safety is incredibly important. The mental focus of the paramedic is incredibly important. So if they're dispatched to a cardiac arrest, the last thing I would want one of my paramedics to doing is being worried about writing something down on a pad of paper. I'd want them to be focused on scene safety, scene security, and also looking at how they're going to approach the patient and that patient care. As a result, from my perspective, the reliability of what's written on a pad of paper is going to be, it's not going to be reliable.
Okay. And so the answer is it yes, that's something that the Bureau of Emergency Medical Services ought to look at to deny renewal of licenses if they use pads of paper? It endangers public safety, and it makes the paramedic or whomever not as able to provide service?
I'm not with the Bureau, sir. I can only give you my opinion regarding what's going on here.
And your opinion is that you said that's one of the reasons that Dixie Ambulance should not have their license.
That's right.
Okay. So is it safer for someone to write on a piece of paper or safer to find the buttons on a laptop while you're driving?
Actually, the newest technology does neither. The newest technology matches the software that's on the AVL, or the automatic vehicle locator, with the incident, and it's done automatically.
So that's the newest, so they don't have to do anything.
That's correct.
And I'm just trying to understand, because you've indicated that because paper is actually a technology, it's just a few thousand years old, but because an ambulance service or a paramedic rescue does not have the latest technology, that their license, it should be reviewed as a reason to not renew their license?
I think the lack of data or the accuracy of data is a reason.
Okay, it is a reason. And so it is a reason for all providers, is that correct?
I didn't look at all providers, I only looked at this one, sir.
I'm asking for your opinion as an expert. You just indicated that it's a reason for the denial of a license, and so it is a reason.
What I would say is data, and having access to data, ensuring you have data, and making sure that data is accurate, focuses in on patient care. And what we can do to, yes, I think the fact of the matter is we need to be doing all we can for the patient. And if we have means available to provide that, then we need to provide that. And that's, yes.
And that if we have means available, that goes back to the sustainability that we talked about earlier, doesn't it?
Actually, what I meant was, let me rephrase that then. We do have the means available, we need to implement it.
All right, when you say we have the means available, who is we?
The pejorative EMS.
The majority of EMS? The
Pejorative EMS.
I don't know what you mean by that.
Okay, I mean, in emergency medical services today, in 2012, there's technologies available to do this. And the fact of the matter is, emergency medical services systems should be proactive in implementing technology.
And I think that's a wonderful position, actually, and I think that we should be proactive in implementing things. I agree with you. I'm just trying to understand your opinion, because based on what I hear, unless the ambulance service is using the most modern technology that is available, it is a reason to withdraw or to not renew their license.
No, what I said was data. The accurate recording of data. And from my perspective, that is a reason, because of the fact that we rely on data to ensure that we have outcomes that improve patient care.
And you also testified that the provision of data from a pad of paper, by definition, in your mind, correct me if I'm wrong, is not an appropriate methodology for reporting data.
That's correct.
And if it's, well, no, I've done enough. That's enough. I'm sorry. This falls along, you stated, and I quote, the only way to optimize patient care is to review data, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Circling around on that, that's why you have fought and worked your whole life, it appears, your whole professional life, to build emergency medical systems so that the data can all be shared and can all be used by everyone to optimize patient care.
I have not built EMS systems to build data. I built EMS systems to provide the best in patient care, and data supports that.
And the data is actually the foundation to optimize patient care, isn't it?
That's one of them, yeah.
When you were here in St. George, did you request an opportunity to visit Dixie Ambulance's business site?
No, sir.
Why not?
I was more interested in the community itself.
And more interested perhaps in the dispatch?
No, I was actually more interested in the demographics of the community and the geography of the community than I was in dispatch even.
And I take it from your, did you study census data?
Yes, I did look at census data. Mm-hmm.
What census data? Census data is a huge number.
2000 data for the city of St. George and 2010 for the city of St. George.
And within that data, what did you specifically look at?
Looked at population growth.
Anything else?
Tried to get more census data, but the census data was rather inexact for the city of St. George.
Did you evaluate traffic and traffic patterns within the city of St. George?
I evaluated the road network. I evaluated traffic during rush hour.
How did you do that?
Watched it. Got in it.
Well, during rush hour, what we euphemistically call rush hour, I don't think it qualifies in many other cities, but where did you go during rush hour?
East-west. I mean, there is the east-west corridor on 2 or 3 different parallel streets.
2 or 3?
Okay, 3. Yeah, it's 3. Yeah.
I'm just curious.
3.
How much time did you spend doing this traffic evaluation?
4 hours.
And how long?
Is that how long it took to go from east to west?
It was rush hour.
It was our rush hour. And how much of that 4 hours was rush hour?
It was interesting. It was a lot more than I suspected. It was about an hour and a half.
Okay. And did you spend time on I-15?
Yes, it did. And not only this trip, I've actually traveled I-15 on numerous occasions.
Did you spend time in Sun River?
That's, I don't actually know the neighborhood, so I'm not going to say that yes, I did or no, I did not.
That's okay. But you did eyeball the traffic.
Yes.
Did you get any traffic studies?
No.
Did you ask for any traffic studies?
No.
And just you indicated that your testimony and belief based upon for response times is based upon the report of Darren Judd.
That's correct.
Did you do any personal evaluation of Polaris data or any of the other data that Mr. Judd referred to, or just his report?
No, sir.
Just
Just his report.
Just his report. Do you know if his statistical analysis was accurate?
I know one way or the other, not one way or the other. It was an expert report that I read.
One of the things that you said in your report I'm referring to, and it's your Exhibit 35. I'm looking at, I have page 4.
Okay.
There is a item A, 4A,
Okay.
are you with me?
Yes, sir. Staffing?
In boldface, it says, Dixie Ambulance has violated statutes and/or rules and failed to follow operational standards established by the EMS committee. Okay? Now, there's a paragraph down, I think the second paragraph entitled First.
Okay.
You state, Dixie Ambulance routinely does not send 2 ambulances on all Charlie Delta Echo calls. And you use the word routinely. What is the basis of that, using that word?
The data on the next page, on page 5, it responded with a single unit on 65.88% of the Delta calls, 79.15% of the Charlie calls, and 42.96% of the Echo calls.
And that has a footnote that refers to Mr. Judd's report.
That's correct.
Now, you indicate that this is the first full paragraph under A. The EMS Committee of the State of Utah requires a paramedic ground ambulance to staff the scene of a severely traumatized or highly acute medical patient with a minimum of two paramedics.
That's correct.
So, what do you, well, I'll go on. Rather than staff 2 paramedics on each of the ambulances, Dixie Ambulance's policies to staff only 1 paramedic on each of its ambulances. Accordingly, Dixie Ambulance is required to send 2 ambulances on all Charlie, Delta, and Echo, correct?
Correct.
Now, I believe you indicate that that's a violation of state law or rule.
That's correct.
And is that because there are not 2 paramedics on scene?
That's correct.
How do you define on scene?
Treating the patient.
So on scene to you is actually treating the patient, as I said
That's
before,
correct.
where the crumpled metal of 2 cars is. That's on scene.
Treating the patients.
So on scene does not include while the patient is being transported.
No, it sure doesn't, no.
Okay. On the next page, 5, I'm giving the reasons for why they violated law. You state that the second reason for them violating law is second, and I'm quoting, to the extent Dixie Ambulance does send 2 ambulances to a call, it endangers the public by increasing the number of vehicles running lights and sirens as discussed below in Part C4. So is it your opinion that sending 2 ambulances to a call the way Dixie does violates state law or rule?
I don't know.
Okay. Then the third, you talk about the deployment of 3 ambulances during the day and 12 ambulances after, and we come down here and there's the indented paragraph, which is a quotation from a response to interrogatory. And then at the bottom it says, this fails to meet the generally accepted standards of the industry. Tell me what the generally accepted standards of the industry are.
When we look at response time and response time deployment, we take into consideration time of day, day of week. When we're talking about this type of a deployment practice, that's referred to in the interrogatory and the deposition. And the fact that it's a relatively static deployment of ambulances in a system that theoretically is using deployment practices, and there's no, again, it goes back to data, it goes back to the use of geographic information systems, that is generally accepted standards of industry now, is technology.
Okay, so is it a violation of state statute and rule that the method of staging and the 3 ambulances during the day and the 2 at night, is it your testimony that this violates state law?
No.
Okay. On 4th, you state that St. George Dispatch has no way of knowing whether Dixie Ambulance is actually sending 2 ambulances or even whether there is a paramedic on board. That's what you state in your opinion, correct?
That's correct.
First of all, how did you come to that knowledge?
From depositions from Dixie Ambulance.
And so because St. George Dispatch doesn't know whether Dixie Ambulance is actually sending 2 ambulances, is that one of the reasons that you believe Dixie Ambulance violated state law or rule?
Yes.
Okay, so Dixie Ambulance violated state law or rule because St. George Dispatch doesn't know where they are.
Because of the fact there's no way of knowing that 2 ambulances are going to be at the scene to have ALS providers and paramedics.
So the violation of law is there's no way of knowing?
Correct.
Can you point me to that law?
No.
So how did you come to the knowledge that it is a law?
From the fact that the state law requires that there be 2 paramedics at the scene. Dispatch does not know. Dispatch, in fact, in some situations knows that there's not going to be 2 paramedics at the scene.
So the violation of Dixie's violation of state law is St. George Dispatch not knowing. That's what you testified. Okay, got it. Now, we continue, and I'm following the structure of your report.
Okay.
We had 4A, and then under A we have 1.
I'm sorry, what page are you on, sir?
Page 4, I'm going back
okay.
Because under capital A, I've been going through the reasons that you believe that Dixie has violated state law and statute.
Or rules?
Yes. Okay. And, if
And
you-
operational standards? Because that's what it says.
Absolutely what it's
All right,
there.
good.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Under reporting, that seems to follow under capital A, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You state, and it's the beginning of the second sentence of that paragraph, because Dixie Ambulance does not have laptops in its ambulances and/or software that allows for automatic transparent reporting, Dixie Ambulance employees input the required data using desktop computers at the hospital or other location after a call is completed or more frequently at the end of the 12-hour shift. And then it talks about a cursory review of the Polaris data, and then you say that the response times are recorded in round numbers,
That's correct.
just minutes and no seconds. Does the fact that response times and numbers are recorded in round numbers, just minutes and not seconds, constitute a violation of state statute or law?
I would assume not.
Again, you state that the likely result of this is that Dixie Ambulance keeping track responses on a pad of paper in each ambulance. Is keeping, you've already answered that. That could be, well, no, you haven't actually, I'm sorry. So is it the fact that they use a pad of paper in the ambulance to keep the data a violation of state statute or rule?
I would, from what I understand of the state law and rule, it requires that accurate reporting to the state offices. And in my opinion, this is an inaccurate reporting methodology.
So the violation of state statute and rule is inaccurate reporting, and one of the reasons could be the pad of paper.
Exactly.
The last paragraph on page 7 says, further, Dixie Ambulance personnel are not consistent as to who completes the patient care report form. Is that inconsistency of who completes the patient care form a violation of state statute or rule?
I would, from my perspective, it'd be a violation of state rule.
Can you point me to that rule?
No, I cannot.
We go to the next page, which is B. B says, the heading is, Dixie Ambulance has failed to provide services at the level required by its paramedic rescue and paramedic ground ambulance licenses. Correct?
Correct.
As the reason for that, because of not having 2 paramedics at the incident site,
At the patient's head.
at the patient right there.
Yes.
And of course, this particular portion of your report is based upon your reading of state law about the definition of the scene of an accident or medical emergency.
That's correct.
Are there times when treatment continues from the crash site? I'm using that, the crushed metal. Are there times when that continues to the hospital?
Should continue all the time, 100% of the time.
Next to C. Dixie Ambulance has committed acts in the performance of a professional duty that endangered the public. And it is my opinion that Dixie Ambulance has committed acts in the performance of its duty that create dysfunction that endangers the public. Can you tell me what those acts are?
Well, again, it goes to the, I would point first to Dixie's briefing, in which they state that there's been no standard of care established for this community. To me, that is, that's a basic, that a standard of care be community. Dixie's not been proactive in reaching out to the dispatch center to be able to resolve the dispatch problems and the time problems that have been in the depositions.
So, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay, go ahead.
No, continue if you need to.
No, that's fine.
Okay. So, one of the acts that shows dysfunction by Dixie Ambulance and has endangered the public is the failure to get a standard of care agreement with St. George City.
Absolutely. In my opinion. Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Okay. Then the next thing, it's the very bottom of page 8. It states, overall, Dixie Ambulance takes a component-based approach to care rather than a systems approach. Is the fact that they take a component-based approach to care rather than a systems approach acts that endanger the public?
In my opinion, yes, sir.
If you were to define the emergency medical system for the city of St. George, what would that system include?
As I testified earlier, it's the continuum of care from the time an incident happens until there's definitive treatment for the patient at a care facility.
So the system would include the hospital,
Absolutely.
the emergency room physicians, fire, police,
All the above.
all of the above. So, based upon your opinion, currently the system is in dysfunction.
That's correct.
And this dysfunction endangers the public.
That's correct.
So, Dixie Regional Medical Center endangers the public.
They're part of the system.
The fire chief and his paramedics endanger the system.
Good. It's the system's approach. It's the lack of a system.
So, Dixie Ambulance should lose its operational license because of failing to use a systems approach, because it endangers the public.
That's correct.
So therefore, following that logic, we should close down Dixie Regional Medical Center, we should fire the ER docs, and we should terminate fire service as it currently exists. Is that true?
No, Dixie Ambulance is the driver of the pre-hospital care system. Dixie Ambulance is the one that responds to the scene. It's the one that has the initial interaction with the patient, and it is the heart of an EMS system. The EMS provider is the heart of an EMS system. It's responsible for reaching out to the other components.
So the dysfunction of the emergency medical services within St. George City that you have described, and it's dysfunction, not function, is the responsibility of Dixie Ambulance.
In my opinion, yes.
If we go again on page 9, the first full paragraph states, in addition to the items discussed above, Dixie Ambulance has, 1, failed to establish dispatch procedures and protocols.
That's correct. This is what I was provided by Dixie Ambulance. This is dated 1998, and it says Dixie Ambulance Services Inc. Medical Priority Dispatch System, which obviously, interesting enough, they have whited out something here, and because I'm very familiar with this, you could provide me with that. The fact of the matter is, Dixie Ambulance, and this was provided as Exhibit 2, but there's a 2, I guess that means something here. In fact, on the information that was provided by Dixie Ambulance, there is no echo calls on here. It's only A, B, C, and D, where this is so I don't know, this is the latest version of what we're talking about here. I'd be more than happy to actually provide this to you all. It not only identifies A, B, C, and D, but also identifies echo calls. So there seems to be a disconnect between the echo dispatch function, which is the worst of the worst calls, and what Dixie Ambulance has provided as their dispatch protocol. So yes, they failed to establish, in my opinion, dispatch protocols and procedures.
Do you know when that one in your left hand was adopted by dispatch?
This one?
Do you know when they adopted it?
It should be on here sometime. I think it's 2010.
So there's been changes in dispatch, do you
Oh,
think?
incredible amount of changes.
Good. So number 2, going back to this, failed to use a quality assurance improvement and outcome evaluation program. Correct?
Correct.
These are the reasons, in addition to the ones we've described. Provided the city of St. George with unacceptably slow response times.
That's correct.
I believe you were here this morning when Dr. Tremea spoke.
That's correct.
He, together with the emergency room physicians, did not seem to agree that the response times are unacceptably slow.
According,
Can you-
Go ahead,
sorry.
sorry.
Do you want to ask a question?
That's what I'm trying to get there. Did not seem to agree that they're unacceptably slow. What is the basis for you saying that they are unacceptably slow?
The fact of the matter is, the fact that they're not putting 2 paramedics at the scene of a patient, and
Okay.
you should measure according to response times. You should measure again. The clock stops when there's 2 paramedics at the scene of a patient.
And the scene is the site of the incident,
It's the patient.
the site of the patient. Okay, I understand. But it does not, does it include the transport?
We've already talked about that. Again,
Right, we
no,
have.
it does not include the transport. The transport is a different function of timing.
So the paramedic, the time for the paramedic is before transport.
I'm sorry?
The time, according to law, when paramedics are there at the scene is prior to transport.
That's correct. You can't
Then you
transport a
would-
patient if you're not there.
That's true. Then, number 4, endangered the general public by requiring 2 ambulances running lights and sirens to all of these calls, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. Echo.
Mhm.
Does this mean that when fire responds, that they're endangering the public?
Fire is dispatched from a stationary base that is typically near the scene of the incident, as the fire chief testified this morning. He's there a vast majority of the time, though he did not have any quantitative data ahead of the ambulance, is what his testimony was. But the ambulance follows fire as far as arriving at the scene. So fire is going to have the first impact with that patient. If anybody should not be responding red lights and siren, then it would be the ambulance, because fire is having their first intervention. The second intervention is caused by the paramedic, or the paramedic unit, and the way the system is designed and the way the units are deployed here. The third arriving unit, which would be the second ambulance, is coming from a further away location than the second ambulance, coming across town in many situations because of the deployment mechanisms of the 2 different deployment sites on like 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And so we're traveling even a longer distance. And so, yes, I think that's endangering the public.
And the public is endangered based on number 5, because they failed to use preventative maintenance programs?
I totally agree with that, yes, sir.
There's been testimony that there has been some preventative maintenance program. Your testimony was that they didn't have a written preventative maintenance program, so that you could not discover what the preventative maintenance program was. So is the endangerment to the public the failure to write it down, or the failure to perform it?
My testimony is based on the deposition that indicated they didn't have one.
I understand that, but there's been testimony here that they actually had one.
I wasn't here for that.
So, is the endangerment the failure to write it, or the failure to perform it?
Actually, both. Documentation of preventive maintenance is key. So it's both.
Okay. Then we continue with dispatch procedures and protocols on page 9. I think we've already talked about those. Quality assurance, we've already talked about those. We've talked about response times probably ad nauseum. But I would like to, you stated earlier that because there was not a standard of care agreement between Dixie Ambulance and the city, that's a reason not to renew their license. True?
True.
If I can refer you to, if I can find it on here, I'm trying to find a footnote, and my eyes aren't as good. I'm looking at, look at page 11.
Okay.
Yeah, it's at the bottom. I had it highlighted and I couldn't even see it, sorry. Third line up from the bottom above the footnotes, it says the generally accepted response times are 8 minutes, 59 seconds or less for live
Sorry, what page
Sorry,
are you
I'm
on?
not-
Page 11.
I still on my page 11. Footnotes that says anything about response time.
It's above the footnotes.
Oh, it's not in the footnotes.
It's the text above the
Oh, I'm
footnotes.
sorry.
I apologize.
Okay, I was trying here.
Are you with me?
Yeah, okay, now I am.
It says the generally accepted response times
Mhm.
are 8 minutes, 59 seconds or less for life-threatening calls,
Mhm.
Charlie Delta Echo calls, and 12:59 for non-emergency calls, Alpha Bravo.
Mhm.
That's the generally accepted response times, correct?
Correct.
Then the footnote,
I think what I actually said was 8:59 for the Charlie, Delta, and Echo. I think you asked me if there
Oh.
was anything for Alpha and Bravo, and I think I said to you, no, there's really not.
yeah. So there's no real standard for Alpha Bravo.
That's correct.
But there is for 8:59. And once again, who has established that
The
standard?
Commission of Accreditation for Ambulance Services which is the commissioning body for ambulance services, is established response time.
Okay, and that's what they call, they're known by CAS?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you know what, well, let's do the footnote. There's a footnote number 28.
Mhm.
It says standards vary by community, but given the total call volume density, and geography of St. George, in my opinion, this should be the standard recommended for the city of St. George. Response times are critical, and then it goes on to describe why.
Right.
What I want to focus on is this, in my opinion, this should be the standard recommended for the city of St. George. Correct?
Correct.
Do you know if Gold Cross has a standard of care agreement with Salt Lake City?
No, I do not.
Well, there's been testimony that the standard of care agreement with Salt Lake City that has been entered into between Gold Cross and Salt Lake City provided for an acceptable response time on Charlie, Delta, and Echo calls of 9 minutes and 59 seconds. Does that surprise you?
No, because Salt Lake City has all ALS first response.
And so because they have all ALS, response time is not as important?
No, they're putting paramedics at the scene of a patient in Salt Lake City. So they're putting 2 paramedics at the scene with the patient.
So
Much faster than 8:59.
So response times are not the hard line of 8 minutes and 59 seconds, it's variable?
No, response times are patient care driven.
Oh. And who decides in each locality what the patient care driven response time should be?
The Commission of Accreditation of Ambulance Services has established the standard.
But who decides in the locality?
Guess it would be left to the City Council.
Are you aware that the City Council of St. George has been approached to enter into a standard of care agreement and has not?
According to the brief from, I'm not too sure how they're defining a standard of care agreement. According to the brief that I received again from, and I just read that to you from Dixie Ambulance, it says that there's no standard of care agreement with the City of St. George.
So that's how you became aware of it?
That's
Right.
correct.
Didn't you say that the failure to get a standard of care agreement is one of the reasons to not renew or take away the license of Dixie Ambulance?
Actually, what I said is the failure to have a standard of care for the community is a failure, not to have a standard of care agreement with the city. There is no standard of care, any type of written standard of care being provided here.
Very good, thank you. I think we've pretty much talked about equipment. In reviewing the, you also make an opinion that Gold Cross meets or exceeds the standards of public convenience and necessity. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
In order for Gold Cross to meet or exceed the standard of public convenience and necessity in St. George, what must it do differently than Dixie Ambulance is doing at the present, to your knowledge?
First is to meet the state law.
Okay? And in meeting the state law, you're referring to the two paramedics at the site of initial treatment before transport.
That's correct.
What else?
Response, well, I mean, first and foremost is meeting the state law. Secondly, I think having response times that actually impact patient care is a very, very important part of this. Thirdly, the fact that it is a data, they have the latest technology, data, and being able to capture the data that we've talked about several times this morning, to be able to do quality improvement, quality assessment is an important part of this. As we talked about earlier, they are accredited by the Commission on Accreditation of Ambulances, or accredited as far as an accredited center of excellence. So they have a clear track record of being able to gather this data. They have a clear track record of having written protocols, procedures, because those are all required by CAS before accreditation processes. So it's all a matter of philosophy, all matter of investment in technology to be able to provide the patient the absolute best in patient care.
Okay. I'm going to try to come back and have you, if this is correct. The reasons that you think Gold Cross would be better than Dixie Ambulance for the city of St. George is the compliance with state law as you have defined it.
As the state has defined it.
No.
Not as I have defined it. I can read you the state statute. I mean, it's the state defined it.
And I'm sorry, but as you have interpreted it.
Okay, whatever.
Okay. Second, the belief that response times would be better.
Correct.
And third, the ability to collect better data. And four, to have written policies.
And protocols.
Policies and protocols.
That's correct.
Those are the four reasons.
In addition to providing better coverage with four vehicles versus 3 and 2.
I thought that was part of response time in state law.
No, response times are deployment strategies that we've talked about earlier, using time of day, day of week data to be able to strategically deploy ambulances to meet minimum patient needs.
So, response time really is not really linked to the number, but the deployment of ambulances?
It's both.
So it's both the number and the deployment?
It's a complete strategy, yes.
Okay. Have you evaluated Gold Cross's complete strategy for the deployment of the ambulances should they get the license?
No.
Let me just, I'm hoping I'm... I'm just about there. Earlier you talked about unit hour utilization.
Correct.
And the unit hour utilization was the method that you used to determine partly the number of ambulances and also the deployment of the ambulances.
No.
Okay.
Unit hour utilization is a measure of economic efficiency.
Oh, okay.
That's what I testified before.
Okay. Well, I'm more tired than you are, so. If we have the unit hour of utilization, the unit hour of utilization is when it says unit hour of utilization, that's how many hours a specific unit is utilized during a specific shift. Is that correct?
That's roughly the definition.
I'm sure it's not exact. If you have 3 ambulances, and this is not following, not talking about response time or anything else, this is just unit hour of utilization. If you have 3 ambulances, and then add an ambulance for the same call volume, what would happen to the unit hour of utilization?
It drops.
What do you mean by that?
It becomes less.
And when it becomes less, how does that impact?
What do you mean, how does it impact?
Well, what does that mean? If it drops,
It means
does that mean
less.
it's more expensive or is it less expensive?
Well,
Is there more money required if it drops?
the fact is, what it means is that the efficiency is less, but it's also community driven. I mean, let's take the city of New Orleans, for instance.
Well,
No, let me
okay,
finish.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
The city of New Orleans has a very high unit hour utilization. In fact, it's incredibly high. In fact, it's so high that the response times are so poor in the city of New Orleans that people die in the city of New Orleans because of the fact they don't have enough ambulances, because of the fact that the unit hour utilization is over a 0.70 or 0.75 right now. Unit hour utilization is driven by specific community parameters. And so to be able to discern what the proper unit hour utilization is for a community depends upon that community and that community's demographics. So you can't make a generalization regarding a specific community because of the fact the other part of it is that one of the variables of unit hour utilization is ensuring you have proper coverage, to ensure you have response times, and being able to put 2 paramedics at the scene of two paramedics on the scene of an incident. That is part of unit hour utilization. So it's geographic coverage and it's temporal coverage or time coverage. And those 2 factors go into what makes up unit hour utilization and coverage. And it's very, very specific to geography. The Government Accountability Office, the GAO, which has done studies on this, shows in fact the more rural a system gets, the more expensive the system gets because of the fact that this geography versus efficiency has to come into play.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That really was very helpful. So let me just go through this and we'll be done. Okay. If we go from 3 ambulances to 4 ambulances with the same call volume, it would be less efficient.
I can't say that here.
No, I'm not.
And the reason I can't say that here is because of the fact that with 3 ambulances or 4 ambulances, the fact of the matter is interfacility transports come into play. And regardless of what your medical director said this morning, the fact is that clinical care is important on patients in the back of an ambulance during an interfacility transport.
Okay.
Because they're patients. And so having that figure into your unit hour utilization and the fact that, you've got to look at time on scene, time on task, there's multiple variables that go into the calculation of unit hour utilization along with coverage. And so there's no generalization that one can make.
So if we take out all interfacility transports, and we're talking only about 911 emergency calls, and the call volume stays exactly the same, and you go from 3 ambulances to 4 ambulances, the ratio would go down.
That's correct.
And by the ratio going down, it would mean it would be less efficient.
I don't know if I would say less efficient. I would say that the efficiency may drop, but the fact of the matter is that, again, one of the variables here is improved response times and improved coverages. So yes, the efficiency is going to go down, but you also then have improved coverage for response time by putting 2 paramedics at the scene of every patient.
And the efficiency, as you said, would go down, but there's a whole lot of other factors. And one of them is the question about how much the city, the local authority, wants to spend and wants to do to pay for their service. Because it seems to me isn't there always a balance between being the best and the most efficient at the best possible cost that the community is willing to bear?
Absolutely.
And in Richmond, the community is willing to bear 25% of the cost.
Again, I go back to my earlier statements. It wasn't based on efficiency in Richmond. It was based on victims of violence. It was based on... No. I think that's an important point, because if you look at the payer mix in the city of Richmond, when we had about 28% of the patients who were below the poverty line, we had another 26% of the patients who were Medicaid patients. We had a very, very poor city within the city of Richmond. So, and as I also testified earlier, there were parts of Richmond that weren't getting any EMS system. So the city wasn't regarding, the city felt like we want to at least provide some service to all citizens within the city. And that's why they decided on subsidization.
And so the locality, the geography, the circumstances, the experience are all indications of what needs to be used to give proper ambulance care.
I think the patient comes first, frankly.
I understand. I don't have anything else, thank goodness.
Okay, thank you.
I have no questions, sir.
All right.
We have
Tell me
Mr. Moffett after lunch. Or
When would you like to reconvene, and what?
Well,
Were you going to call Mr. Moffett?
I'm going to call Mr. Moffett as a very brief rebuttal witness, and
Okay.
we could either do that now or we could do it after lunch.
Well, I'm pooped.
Let's do it after lunch.